No lineman is ever called sexy, but is it the best thing to do for the Jags at number one? Who are the guys we're not talking about enough? And what's the sweet spot for the Colts? We're going to get into that today on Locked On NFL Draft.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of the Locked On NFL Draft Show. I am your host, former NFL and AFL defensive back, Eric Crocker. And of course, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan Tracy from Rogue Analytics and John Harris of footballtakeover.com. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day as we get into all this good stuff, man. It's combine week, and a lot of guys are testing, some guys opting out of testing on the field, and we're talking about who potentially could be the number one overall pick for the Jaguars and why maybe it should be offensive line, not the sexy thing. And one guy that would potentially be there for them is not going to be performing there, Neil. So, John, I want to ask you first, one, do you think they should take offensive line at one, Jacksonville? And if so, who should that guy be?
Well, I have one at 3 and one at 4 in my Harris 100. I have Evan Neal at 3 and I have Ike Ekwonu at 4. And I don't know that there is a lot that separates them. I mean, Neal is he's bigger at 345, 350. I think Ekwonu's probably a little bit more of a masher in the run game. I mean, it's like splitting hairs between the two. And here's what the Jags are up against. And it's ironic that we're in Indianapolis because, to me, the story of Andrew Luck, when the story of Andrew Luck is told, what are we going to say about Andrew Luck? And it's going to be that his offensive line never took care of him. And the Colts didn't take care of that offensive line until it was too late. They went and they got Anthony Costanzo early, but they didn't fill in any of the other gaps. Well, then in 2018, they draft Braden Smith. They draft Quentin Nelson. That line turns it around. Luck has one of his better years. That 2018 Colts team was one of the better Colts teams. But Andrew had been beaten up so badly that he just said, I'm done. I'm walking away. And if I'm a Jaguars fan, that's what I'm most scared of. Not that Trevor doesn't want to compete or whatever, but you get to a point where your body's so beat up that you spend more time rehabbing and getting your body right as opposed to preparing yourself to be a better football player. And I think that's what Andrew got to just because he had taken such a pounding. And in Houston, I saw Deshaun Watson get sacked 62 times in a year. The next year was 46. And, Deshaun's a young guy, and obviously, we know what's going on. That's a different issue. But just from the pounding standpoint, you'd see him by the end of the season, and, man, he was beat up. And I look at what Trevor went through last year. And I know they didn't give up a ton of sacks in comparison to those numbers. But if you don't protect that investment, like Andrew Luck, is going to end up in the river somewhere down the way that somebody has just discarded because it's so beat up and you've got to move on from a guy that he's having a shoulder problem now because he got sacked so many times or whatever the case might be. I know the Jags have got some issues. They've got issues at a lot of different spots. And because there is no player that teams are going to just bump their head up like, hey, we got to have this guy at number one. The Jags aren't going to get those offers. So to me, the best fit, arguably the best players in this draft, I think it's kind of a 4-player elite draft. And the Jags get one of those that can fill that left tackle spot, what they weren't getting from Cam Robinson. Not sexy, albeit, but I think it's the best thing for Trevor, and it's the best thing for that team to move forward. That if you're not protecting me, look at Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's running for his life in that Super Bowl. Now, you got Jamar Chase, these guys' weapons, but he's throwing from his wallet the whole game. Those weapons don't matter. So I think, yes, it may not be sexy, but I think the Jags are going to end up calling one of those names on draft night, Ike Ekwonu or Evan Neal.
And it's also not enough just to have like you said, with the Colts, a player or two. Look at Alan Marpet retiring early, a guy that's been through a lot. But if he had more support early in his career, maybe he'd last longer. Maybe he's not as beat up all by himself. And you can't let, if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars, after all the turmoil that you've been through, like your number one pick quarterback, your franchise quarterback that should be coming down the line, get away from you because you didn't choose to make it the priority that it should be in protecting him, even if you have decent protectors already.
I mean, I think we've seen this too with a lot of young quarterbacks, man. They start to develop bad habits. They start to see ghosts. And John, you probably saw this with, David Carr, who was with the Texans and how his career started. I mean, big quarterback. He had the athleticism. He had the arm, but he was just getting beat up behind that. And that was the first year that Houston Texans franchise. But, I mean, he was just getting beat up. And you start to just feel that, and your clock starts to run out. And I think there's a time clock at every position, whether it's a cornerback, quarterback, just when that thing goes off where it's like, oh, okay, I need to react right now. Where when you are a quarterback who's consistently under duress, you start to throw passes before you really want to because you're anticipating that pressure. And now you're missing reads, you're missing throws, and those habits continue to carry over because you don't really trust offensive line. I get it. Trevor Lawrence, he's not someone that took a ton of sacks like you talked about with Burrow or even like Deshaun Watson. But I watched him. He was running for his life half the time. And if that's going to continue to be the case, we're never going to truly see the best version of Trevor Lawrence. And he's going to have to play a lot of hero ball. And I don't think you want that. You want a guy who can, at the very least, have serviceable offensive line play. I think building it around that O-line, the left tackle, right tackle, and maybe addressing that in the draft should help your young quarterback. So if they are going to go O-line, I know you talked a little bit about Ekwonu. Do you think that there's a potential for him to maybe potentially play guard? Because I have heard some people think that maybe the length isn't quite there for him. He's listed at 6'4". He might even come in under that. Will he have the long arms? If so, do you think there could be a transition from him from tackle to guard? Because he looks like a terrific tackle, but we know in NFL they have those thresholds.
You're exactly right, Eric. And that brings up a great point about there are going to be certain teams. I got to ask this question about Marcus Jones. Totally kind of like unrelated, but related. Marcus Jones is a corner at the University of Houston. He's all of about 5'8". I mean, the program says 5'9", but I've stood next to him. He's 5'8". Now, this dude is a flat-running baller. Like, he is a stud. Great returner. He'll get up in somebody's, shorts and be with him all day. He just is not big. And I was asked by somebody at the University of Houston the other day, like, where are the scouts saying he's going to go? And I said, look, there are going to be some scouts and some teams that won't even put him on their board. Like, forget it. Not even going to do it. And I bring that up because there are going to be some teams that are like, his arm length is what? Okay, well, he's a guard for us. No matter what, he's a guard for us. There are going to be teams with those thresholds, and you're just not going to break through it. Well, I don't care who he is. It doesn't matter. He's a guard. He's got 32.5-inch arms. We need 33 at a minimum, and we're just not going to budge. And there are teams that are going to do that. And it's funny because I talked to a couple of our scouts, and I talked to a couple of other scouts in the area, just talking about prospects. And one of the scouts that I talked to was like, oh, yeah, he's a guard. Now, this was before the 2021 season, and I could see that. But then you watch his 2021 tape, and you're like, what? That guy's legit. He needs to be a top 5 pick. And I don't know that you take a top 5 pick and put him at guard. But, I mean, look, using the Colts as an example, number 6 pick in the draft, 2018, it took Quentin Nelson. We're like, that guy. And the thing is Nelson's got tackle traits. Like, his arms are like 34-inch arms. He's 6'4", 325. He doesn't look like a guard, but he plays like you would want one to play. So I do think there are going to be some teams that are like, no. That dude is a guard. I'll take a corner and put him at either tackle spot, and I feel like I'll be okay for the next how many years.
Yeah, you talk about thresholds, man. They have that for cornerback as well. If your arms aren't as long as they would like, some teams are going to cross that guy off the board, and I think a guy that's going to get overlooked a little bit, cornerback out of Auburn. All right.
Roger Mccrary.
Yeah, Roger Mccrary. He has those – I mean, they are extremely short. We're talking about 28 and a half, 29-inch arm length arms, which is crazy. There are teams that have a 32-inch arm length threshold where they're just like, arms aren't long enough. Can't be on our board as an outside guy, and they're going to peg him in there as a slot. We're going to get into more of that as we continue this show. And coming up, we're talking about some guys who are a little under the radar, but are high on our radar. and I can't wait to get in that. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about Bet Online. Football might be over. Basketball is in full steam ahead. Both pro and college hoops are from all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where, the next fire coach is going to land. BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. It's like I said, man, the combine coming up. Bet on some of those. Who's going to run the fastest, over-unders on all that. They also are going to have it's going to be a number one sports source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right down to your Olympic coverage and information. Head over right now to the website today and use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and actions. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, guys, let's talk about it. We got some guys are a little under the radar. Ryan, we're going to start with you. Who's the first guy that comes to mind for you when you think of, man, he's not really being talked about enough, but he might go higher than most people think?
It's another guy in the trenches, opposite the two tackles that we talked about before. He could be there. From San Diego State, Cameron Thomas, a guy that just gets to the passer. He's not the most explosive guy. He's listed at 6'6", 275. I think he actually played a little bit heavier, that to tell you the truth. But it doesn't matter to me. His motor never ends. I mean, he has like that hybrid deal that never runs out of juice. It's always there. He can reduce inside. He's even lined up in a one tech and been able to pull it off. The difference for me is that he uses his length well, and he doesn't give up. Asked Carson Strong what he thought about him as he chased him around the field. I even went back to see Wilson in 2020. I thought that was a great film for him as well. The most interesting thing for me is he can twist. He can run those stunts. He can fight through doubles. He can split them. He has a nice chop. He's got a long arm that I think he's probably going to be one of those guys that forces some of those thresholds on the offensive tackle thing, because I think he can get into the chest plate pretty easily. But for me, you can take him anywhere from a 3-tech out to a 9, in my opinion. It doesn't matter if you're playing an even front or an odd. He can pull it off. And I really like him as an anchor for somebody who wants to be multiple. So he doesn't have to come off the field. He can play the 5-tech in the base, go out and crush the edges when you get to the passing downs. I really like everything he brings. He's just not the best athlete. He's going to be decent, I think. If you're going to weight base it, it might come out about even. I'll know when I get the metrics in and get the matrix done on him. But the problem for me is he gets a little bit high at times. He just doesn't bend quite enough. If he can just massage that torso a little bit, get a little bit more out of it, his snap timing is really good, and so it makes it almost an illusion about how quick he comes off the ball.
All right, John Harris, who do you have for us?
Well, my guy that, and I want to say I'm biased a little bit here, but my buddy's a sideline reporter at Tulsa. And so I go on his show every now and again, and we were talking about different prospects, and we got near the end of our talk, and he said, have you seen left tackle Tyler Smith? And I had seen Tulsa a couple times, but I wasn't paying too much attention because Smith was a third-year guy and didn't play a lot in 2019. In fact, he had only played 2 starts, and the thought was he was going to redshirt. And well, then COVID hits, and when COVID hits, Tyler Smith's playing pretty well. 2021 hits, and he plays even better. And I hear he's going back to Tulsa. And then the day the deadline hits, he's going to the draft. I'm like, oh, man, well, I got to get caught up on this guy. So I watch a couple games. I'm like, okay, I see some things. And then I watched him against Oklahoma State. And it's one of those things when you're watching tape and you find a guy that you really like and you see him doing like superhuman things, you just I start chuckling. I mean, there was one play where 5 technique was rushing off the edge. He just hammers him. I mean, just hammered him with 2 hands. The Oklahoma State guy goes to the ground. He then splashes him. He gets up. The Cowboy gets up, and he takes him and shoves him to the ground again. And the quarterback all that time is looking for somebody to throw. He can't throw. He sees Smith doing this, and he runs and follows for like 5 to 7 yards on the scramble. And I thought, holy smokes, this guy is – and this is not – it's interesting because I guess I'm old now. I would use my reference of Mike Tyson, like what it was like to go against Mike Tyson. And there are probably some listeners going like, well, who's Mike Tyson? Which is kind of sad. Go to YouTube. You see Mike Tyson. He was a bad dude. And Mike hit with bad intentions. Now, it wasn't always the prettiest looking thing, and sometimes Mike was swinging wildly. But, man, when he connected, ooh, and that's the way I feel with Tyler Smith. When he connects, you're in trouble. And I think he is going to end up I got him at 42 in the Harris 100. I think maybe my next version, he might get up into the top 32. I think those teams down at the bottom end of the draft that are going to be looking for tackles are going to find a guy they love in Tyler Smith from Tulsa.
Yeah, me, I cover the 49ers, and that's a team who they're going to have to take a flyer potentially on a tackle because Mike McGlinchey, that's a guy who they already picked up his fifth-year option, so he has to play on that. But he tore his quad off of the bone. So that's an injury where it sounds like you have like a 50-50 chance to play again. And that's what's kind of being reported. So we don't know exactly how bad that is, but you might not draft a guy extremely high, anticipating him come back. But maybe if there's a day 3 guy with high upside, but maybe played out of school like Tulsa, you might say, you know what, let's take a flyer on this guy just in case Mike McGlinchey can't play tackle for us this year. I think for me, it's got to be Kaiir Elam out of Florida, the cornerback, 6'2", around 200 pounds. Everyone's talking about the top guys, right? You hear Sauce Gardner. Can't stop hearing his name. You hear Derek Stingley Jr. We've been hearing guys like, Booth and the athleticism that he talks about. I mean, even with Roger McCrary, we just spoke about him for Auburn and even other guys, McDuffie out of Washington, Gordon out of Washington. I mean, you hear about all these other guys, Kobe Bryant out of Cincinnati, but nobody's talking about Elam out of Florida. And this is a guy who in 3 years, first team All SEC 2020, was a Jim Thorpe finalist in 2020, semifinalist, excuse me, All SEC freshman. He's only been there for 3 years. I'm looking at some of his stats, not the most interceptions, but one thing that stands out, not a whole lot of solo tackles. And I think a lot of people, they like to see high tackle numbers. As a cornerback, I don't like to see that because that means you're giving up a lot of catches and you're having to make tackles unless you're playing like a Tampa 2, which most teams aren't. So it tells me he's being more aggressive with his play style. Now, again, that translates over to what I've seen on film. I think he's a guy that moves extremely well. He looks like he has no issues running vertically with guys. I like to see how guys, how do you react when you're playing against someone who comes in with a lot of hype or comes in with a lot of speed and dynamic type receiver? Does a lot of your technique start to go out the window, or do you continue to play that and you play with confidence? And watching him against Jameson Williams at Alabama, who I think is a terrific speedster of a receiver from Alabama, who probably will be the first receiver taken, if not for a torn ACL. Man, he's standing in there. He's not bailing on any of his technique. They tried different things with him, but fake screen and go. He covered that. He's knocking the ball away. You see the confidence that he plays with. And I'm like, man, all those things, if there's a misplay here and there or a misstep here and there or whatever, I can handle that because when you have the mindset he has, matched with the ability, a guy, again, that's around 6'2", 200 pounds, wherever he's lacking, I feel like I can coach him up to get him to the level I need him to be. So will he be the first corner or second corner taken? No, but I'd be curious to see if he runs well, which those Florida guys typically run well. Yep. Will he be a guy that even makes it out of the first round?
That's going to be a tough one, whether he does get out. If he runs well, and you put a guy, like you said, 6'1", 195, 6'2", 200, that runs in the low 4.4s or even on into the 4.3s. I mean, teams are going to be – I would think teams that do play, like you said, Eric, that do play press and get up in you, they're going to look at a guy like that and think, ooh, we can coach up. And that's the key. We can coach him up. And, of course, coaching hubris has hurt a lot of coaches over the years and hurt a lot of players over the years. But if you think you can do it, at least that's moldable clay for sure. I'm really curious. I've watched that same Alabama tape, and I walked out there going, man, I like Elam. I kept coming back. I was actually watching Evan Neal and trying to watch Neal and a couple of the down linemen for Florida, and I kept coming back to Jameson Williams against Kaiir Elam. I'm like, I kind of like watching this matchup a little bit better because Elam was there all day. And as long as he stays interested, it just felt like there were games in 2021 where it's like, whatever. I mean, okay, so I'm playing this guy. It doesn't matter. It's not Jameson Williams. It's not Alabama. Yeah. And I think he checked out. And I think that happens to players. They start thinking about the league. They start thinking about coming to the NFL. They put good stuff on tape, and now they just want to stay healthy so that they can go and then test and do all those kind of things. So I think all three guys we brought up, and Ryan, I'm glad you brought up Cameron Thomas. I'm a real big fan of Thomas. It doesn't matter where you want to play him. And even if he comes in at 275, I think, to your point, I think he's probably a little bit more athletic than we give him credit. I think we're playing 4-man front. We're playing even front. I think he can go play the edge on first down if you got to bump him inside on second, third down, on long passing situations. I think he can really be successful. I don't know that he can withstand full time inside, but I think if you took kind of a Jonathan Allen inside-outside sort of plan with him, now Allen's a little bit bigger, but I think Thomas is probably a little quicker. I think you could have something with Cameron Thomas. I'm real curious to see where he goes. And I think people have sort of soured on him. I don't know if it's a Senior Bowl thing or not. I don't know. But when he's healthy, I think he could be a problem. That relentlessness is something that teams, they say it's important to them, but they don't go out and draft those guys. But then you see him on the field, you're like, oh, that guy's relentless. Well, yeah, that's a trait that guys have that these teams should want, and hopefully they'll find it in Cam Thomas.
Yeah, I think this class, man, is full of edge guys, whatever type of edge style you want, with guys like Cam Thomas or like Karlaftis out of Purdue, right? He brings a different type of ability as an edge rusher at the tackle position, any type of tackle that you want. They have all those guys. They're a really deep class at two very important positions. And we're going to talk about another position that's extremely important as well, the quarterback position for the Indianapolis Colts. And some things have been said at the Combine and how that can affect the way that they approach this draft. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about Built Bar. All right, and this is the time of year, especially it's March now, right? It's March 1st while we're recording this, March 2nd when most of you are listening to this, and your New Year's resolutions, they are typically by now out of the door. But not this year, man, because we got Built Bar, and it's helping us stay on pace with what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And, it's easy with Built Bars because it tastes so good, and it's not just your typical protein bar that's chalky and waxy. Speaking of Built Bars, have y'all tried the Puffs? If you haven't already, you're missing out. It's going to be one of your favorites. It's one of the best tasting bars that they have. Puffs are their first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They are fluffy. They are marshmallowy. They are not just a protein bar. They are a treat. And like all the other Built Bars, man, they are covered with 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors like yummy cinnamon, churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie, tons and tons of really good flavors, even with the Built Bar Puffs. All right, so they are very good. Those are things that are going to be your new favorite as well. Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, and yes, that includes the Puff, 100% real chocolate. They are low in calorie, high in protein, and they're going to replace any candy bar that you have. All right, with these things, they are better. And typically a candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. All right, go to built.com and scroll down to the macros chart, and you'll be blown away by what you see. High in protein, low in calorie, high in fiber, low in carbs. And most Built Bars, they contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Compare that to any candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Just not good for you. And they have a ton of really good flavors as well. Mint brownie, coconut almond, and new flavor this month, white chocolate cookies and cream. That's probably going to be my new favorite. They are very delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. In fact, if you think of a flavor that might be good, they might make it. And if they do, it'll be delicious for you. All right. At Built Bar, they are all about the taste. They want it to taste delicious, and they want to make it taste delicious first. And then they'll figure out how to make it healthy. All right, I don't know how they do it, but they just do it, and they pull it off every single time. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off of your order. Again, use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, guys, there are some interesting comments made about the future of Carson Wentz with the Indianapolis Colts. And I think most people are looking at the landscape of the quarterback and how are you going to address that position? Because if not Carson Wentz, who threw almost 30 touchdowns, had less than 10 interceptions, I believe it was 7, not a terrible year, but even then, if you just have a fairly average quarterback, you're trying to improve. But how do you improve from Carson Wentz, which was kind of so-so at times? Well, okay, maybe Aaron Rodgers. Well, it looks like Green Bay is trying to make room to make him the highest paid quarterback in the league. Oh, maybe Tom Brady, but it sounds like he's staying put. And if you do want Tom Brady, Bruce Arians is talking about potentially having to trade 5 first-round picks. I know he's just talking, but it's going to cost you something pretty good to go ahead and get Tom Brady. And he has to want to go to your team. Well, maybe Deshaun Watson. We don't know what his legal situation is going to be like right now. I mean, it's all over the place and nothing is settled. Or maybe like a Russell Wilson, and haven't really heard much about if they are really willing to part ways with him. So how do you address this situation, especially if you are the Colts? Is it through a free agent? Is it maybe a Jimmy Garoppolo? Is it who can't even participate in anything until the summer because of a shoulder injury? Is it the draft with one of these guys? And I think you're missing a first-round pick if you're the Colts because of Carson Wentz. So, John, help us out here. What do the Colts do?
Well, it's interesting listening to Chris Ballard today talk about Carson Wentz, and he made it sound like, hey, we had a conversation, nothing has been decided yet. And then I talked to a few people there, of course, in Indianapolis that we know, and they're thinking next steps because they don't see Carson Wentz coming back to the Colts. And then you think, and Eric, you laid it out. That's the dilemma that I think one of the more talented teams in the NFL faces. They've got a lot of really good pieces. I mean, Jonathan Taylor is as good a back as he gets. I mean, Quentin Nelson, the offensive line is good. Now, I do think they need a left tackle because Eric Fisher, I don't think, is going to be long for them. And they've got to have another offensive playmaker. And T.Y. Hilton has got a little long in the tooth. I mean, every time he played us, it was 10 catches for 195 yards and 9 touchdowns in the first quarter, it seemed. So he always lit us up. Defensively, I think they're good, and maybe fill a gap here or there. Their younger edge guys got to come up, but it's that piece, and I think that's what makes it so tough for the Colts because it's the piece everybody sees. Everybody saw Wentz go to Jacksonville as a 15.5-point favorite in Jacksonville and just lay a complete egg. And so that complicates everything so much. And it's funny, Eric, because I think the first name that came to mind for me was Garoppolo, because this is a team, and I do believe in windows. This window of what they have of Leonard and Ryan Kelly and Quentin Nelson and Jonathan Taylor, that window isn't going to stay open forever, especially in the AFC. So to me, it's got to be somebody that they move into that spot that is as close to ready. But they don't have a first-round pick. So now they're sitting at 46 or 47. And you start thinking, well, what quarterback is going to be there at 47? Or is there going to be a quarterback in the draft that as they get down to 29, 30, 31, that's maybe still sitting there that they could go up and get, that carries them kind of with that window of time? And I don't know that I really can figure one out. The only one I think that could be really kind of interesting for the Colts would be Malik Willis.
Yeah.
If you put Malik Willis and you just allow Malik to kind of play his game in Indy with that running game, and they incorporate a little bit more of the RPO, more of the R for Malik, I think they could put a lot of teams on blast. I just don't know that Malik is going to get all the way to 47. I think Chris Ballard would have to do some work and work some magic to get a guy like Malik Willis. Now, Malik is not perfect, but as you guys know, when things break down, he can take off. And he can make things exciting. And if you're going to sit there and you're going to lock in on Jonathan Taylor on all RPOs and all zone reads and things, he's going to pull it and run the backside, and you got issues. So Willis would be that guy. I just don't know that the ammunition for them, not having a first-round pick, they're not hamstrung cash-wise, but I just don't know that anybody kind of floats the boat. The one thing that I brought up, if I couldn't get to Malik Willis, but you don't have a first-round pick, you'd have to sell this, and this, Eric, goes to your point, you'd have to sell the Packers on this, that, hey, we're bringing Aaron Rodgers back. We're going to pay him a bunch of money, but he's going to remain a Packer. Okay, Packers, we'll take Jordan Love off your hands for a 2. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Jordan Love is ready-made, all that. But he's been in the league for 2 years. He's been sitting and apprenticing behind one of the greatest of all times. I don't know if that's the full answer for the Colts, but maybe it's a different kind of answer, that they get a guy that's been in the league already, kind of knows how to be a professional, and they put him in, and Jordan Love makes a few mistakes, but he ends up showing it off and becomes that sort of guy that the Packers thought they were getting in the first round. I don't know if the Packers buy it, having put a first-round pick in him, but that's the one I keep coming back to. That might be a little bit of a change-up for the Colts to go out and get, that they could give up their second, which they may not want to do, but it gives them a first-round like talent in the second round. Whereas I would go the other way, thinking these quarterbacks are sort of all second-round talents that are going to end up going to the first. So if they couldn't get Malik Willis, maybe Jordan Love's a plan. And the only other one I would think of, and I know people cringe, but I do think Mitchell Trubisky's got something left. I don't think he's tremendous. I think he and Jimmy are kind of the same guy, just in different clothing. but he's not beat up. Jimmy's beat up. But I think Mitchell getting in that offense where he could rely on a running game that he didn't have in Chicago and rely on a few more weapons. They do need another weapon. But that offensive line in Indianapolis is better than anything Chicago ever put in front of him. And maybe Mitchell Trubisky's an answer. If it's in the draft, I think Malik makes sense. Maybe Jordan Love or Mitchell Trubisky end up making sense. And that's what makes this job as GM so hard. Because I know Chris, and Chris was like, look, when I take a job as a GM, I want three things. I want to be in the Midwest. I want an opportunity to win, and I want the quarterback to be in place. And he had that in Indianapolis until Andrew Luck went away, and now they've been trying to find it for the last 3 or 4 years, and they haven't found it. And that's what makes it so tough because he's a really good GM. But, man, you don't have that gunslinger. Man, forget about it.
And, I want to ask
– for a lot of franchises.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you, Ryan, because John, he laid out, a couple more plans, maybe some things in place, Jordan Love or Mitchell Trubisky. And I think the question that they're going to have to ask themselves is getting a Jordan Love or Mitchell Trubisky better than having Carson Wentz? And that's a tough dynamic there because you just don't know. Now, also they have to ask themselves with, another year with Carson Wentz, should he be better in the system, in the scheme, maybe adding one more weapon? You talked about T.Y. Hilton being a little long in the tooth, adding someone next to Pittman that might be a little bit more dynamic. Obviously, they have a tremendous run game in the offensive line. They have some pieces there. The defense is ready to go. So maybe is it as simple as just one more year with Carson Wentz, or do you think, nope, you got to scrap it and hope that one of these guys that are really talented as quarterback fall to the second round and you just take a flyer on any of those guys? Because I'm looking at it right now, they don't pick until pick 47. I mean, that's middle of the second round, and that's that's tough if you're in the market for a quarterback, which I think they should be there. I mean, you look at this quarterback class, a lot of people aren't as high on it, but we know how quarterbacks just get pushed upwards regardless.
For me, it's got to be about what are the options? What does it hurt you more to take that $15 million in dead money to get $13 million in cap space, or do you ride it out with Carson? Do you try to trade him? There are teams more desperate for quarterback play in this league than the Indianapolis Colts. I think BA might have made a couple of comments today that might make me think, hey, Carson might look good down in Tampa Bay. I don't know. Like I'd be stomping the grass. And good for Chris Ballard for not committing to it, because you got to leave your options open. But I think at the end of the day, if you can't get any trade value for him, I would probably ride it out and try to get Willis. Try to let him come up underneath at least somebody who knows the reins and just deal with Carson. I have to deal with it. You made your bet. You got to lie in it.
It's going to be a tough situation. We'll see how they figure out, man. That quarterback thing, if you don't have it figured out, it's tough to win in the NFL. We all know that. And if you don't have a quarterback, you're trying to figure out how to get one. We'll see if Carson Wentz ends up being that guy for Indianapolis or if it's one of these rookies. All right, we want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And tomorrow we will have Rob Rain joining us. And I believe he's at the Combine as well, or did he stay behind? We'll know more about that tomorrow. But from Eric Crocker at Eric_Crocker on Twitter, we got John Harris here from footballtakeover.com and Ryan Tracy from Rogue Analytics. That's going to do it. And we'll see y'all tomorrow. All right, guys. Peace.